And good morning, world. It is Thursday. It's the 2nd of April 2020. So, we're approaching crescendo point. Jupiter and Pluto are going to be conjunct in about 72 hours, 96 hours, 3-4 days, something like this. And I just thought this is a really good time now as we approach what I consider crescendo is a really good word to describe where we are, astrologically speaking. So I thought this is a good time now to perhaps start the process of retrospect. Now, on the one hand, in the last 2, 3, 4 years, I've used the word pandemic a few times in various different videos. I did not predict this pandemic. No one could have predicted a pandemic. 1 or 2 psychics did. I have to hold my hands up. Having said that, it's been waiting to happen a long time. Now, the astrological symbolism of this, as we got into the end of last year, first of all, Jupiter moved into Capricorn around the start of December. And then Saturn and Pluto began to edge closer and closer to each other. And in the second week of January this year, there was the conjunction of Saturn with Pluto. And on the actual day of the conjunction, Mercury, Ceres, Saturn and Pluto were all exactly conjunct at 22/23 degrees of Capricorn. Now, looking back, at this time, the virus was sweeping through China. It was going through massive lockdown. It was beginning to break in places like Korea, Thailand, Singapore, and the first cases were beginning to appear in Europe. Saturn-Pluto, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, the restructuring of transformation, the reordering of boundaries of government, the way we govern our lives individually, the way we are governed collectively. This isn't over. Saturn-Pluto will come back later in the year, not as strong and as intense as it was in January, but still strong enough to have an impact around late September through to perhaps early mid-November. And then once we're into the end of January and Saturn-Pluto's beginning to pull away from each other, you just think, okay, if we got away with that, at which point Mercury goes into Pisces and goes into its retrograde shadow period at the end of January. And over the period of late January 2020 through to late March, very late March 2020, just a few days ago, Mercury has been either retrograde or in its retrograde period, in its retrograde shadow period. Mercury's been in Pisces, which is the sign most commonly associated with the vagueness, the confusion, the nebulousness, the uncertainty of life, as well as the spirituality and the aesthetic, subtle, refined side of life. It deals with the unconscious and the subconscious, and Mercury is very much about the conscious ways we live our lives. So there's been a lot of confusion, a lot of nebulousness while Mercury's been going through this process. Now, Mercury is now clear of its retrograde shadow period. It is about to conjunct Neptune in the next day or two, and we are approaching the crescendo of confusion. As we got into February, so Mars moved into Capricorn and began its approach to Jupiter and Pluto. And there was a time about 2 weeks ago when Mars conjuncted Jupiter and Pluto. And this was a pretty crazy time. 2 weeks ago, it's when everything's breaking all around the world, apart from in the Americas. The virus is rapidly escalating out of control. The cases in Italy, Britain, Spain, France, and other countries in Europe are rapidly escalating, not as much as they are now, but rapidly escalating, and the governments are reacting in a way that's kind of shutting the door after the horse has bolted. I cannot speak for other governments, but I know that the British government has been so lax in organising testing and organising tests for frontline NHS staff, health staff, let alone the general public. They did not have the finger on the ball in January. They've done some really good things, and whilst we're on that subject, I have to praise the new Chancellor, who I can't believe the stuff he's coming out with. He's absolutely brilliant. Definitely the next Prime Minister. Got to be, because everybody likes him. That's an aside. As we get into the end of March, Mars passes away from Jupiter and Pluto and then approaches Saturn at what I was calling the sting at the end of a tail. The eye of the storm. Mars conjuncted Saturn a couple of days ago. But now here we are, having had Saturn conjunct Pluto, having had Jupiter and Mars and Pluto together, having had the Mercury retrograde, and then having had Mars conjunct Saturn, we're now approaching the end of the first phase of this period of astrological intensity. Jupiter will conjunct Pluto in the next 3 or 4 days. It will then move forward, stand still, go retrograde, conjunct Pluto again, then stand still, go forward and conjunct Pluto again for the third and final time, sometime in the fall, in the autumn, around mid-October, late October. But I'm concerned around the next few days. Also in the next few days, Mercury will conjunct Neptune. Mars will square Uranus in about 5 days, 6 days time. Now, after this, astrologically speaking, the intensity, the immediacy and the urgency of these planetary aspects that have been building in strength from early January to now, it stops increasing. This doesn't mean that things get easier. If I were using this in a in a chart analogy to an individual, I'd be saying, look, the foot is coming off of the accelerator. It's not going on the brake, but it's coming off of the accelerator. Now, I see the figures daily. Over 500 died just in the UK just yesterday. Thousands are going to be dying in America shortly. There's nearly 1,000 a day dying in Spain at the moment. And nevertheless, I'm not going to dispute the medical professionals or the political forecasters, the mathematicians, the people who are paid to predict and whom the government spend a lot of money on and listening to. However, I know my astrology, and it's clear to me from an astrological perspective that once we're 6 days, 7 days down the line from now, the urgency, the immediacy and the feelings of crises and trauma that seem to be besetting the world at the moment, the sense of powerlessness, seems to be not so much slowing down, but certainly not increasing. And I would expect a more stable and balanced perspective to be coming in place within a week of now. So I know we're all on lockdown, or at least a quarter of the planet's population, 3/4 of the Western world are on lockdown. I know that in the next week the results are going to be getting worse and worse and worse. But I'm also suggesting that a week from now, I hope we're going to see a stabilising and a reducing, because astrologically speaking, with Mars the new moon in about 3 weeks' time, that's a bit of a stinker, but it's nothing compared to the stuff we've had in recent days, recent months. The next time we're going to get any serious big challenges is not going to be until this virus repeats itself around September, October time, and that's a different story, and we'll look at that another time. I am suggesting that soon now we're going to get a kind of downturn in the levels of immediacy. Right, a couple of quick jokes, all right? One's kind of so-so, one's really funny. The second one's really funny. It's just a smart-ass one-liner. Okay, here's the first one. A well-known Western politician, no names, leader of one of the countries of the so-called free world, goes on a visit to Israel and contracts the coronavirus and dies. So the Israeli undertakers turn round to the politicians' staff and say, right, we can bury him here in Israel for $100, pounds, yen, or we can ship him back to your country, but that'll cost you $50,000, yen, pounds. So the political staff, they go, ooh, ooh. So they walk away and they have a talk amongst themselves, and then they come back to the undertakers and they say, yeah, we'll go for the 50,000. And the undertakers say, why? And the staff turn around and say, well, last time a major big leader died in Israel, you put him in the ground, 3 days later he rose again, and we can't take the same chance with our guy. If you adapt certain names to that, it's much better. And here's the second one. They have to think about this. I went into the local chemist the other day and spoke to a woman walking around on the shelf to help looking on the shelves. And I said, have you got anything that will defeat COVID-19? And she said, ammonia cleaner. Ammonia cleaner? I'm only a cleaner. Boom, boom. All right, I'm going to keep going with the jokes until the majority of you told me to stop. I've still got loads in reserve because you keep sending them in. Thanks. Catch you tomorrow, world. Bye.